Between World Wars, Part 1. Progress in technology, which had been the hope and promise for the future of society, was finally unleashed on society. In 1914, a chain reaction of international tensions and conflicts led major global powers into a devastating world war that brought European civilization to the brink of destruction. In 1918, at the conclusion of World War I, well over 10 million people had been killed, with more than twice that number wounded. The war changed the global outlooks of everyone involved. It paved the way for the Russian Revolution. It hastened the resentments that the Nazis and Italian fascists would later manipulate. Governments began to control the rhythms of economic, political, and cultural life. Information would be controlled. Public expression would be censored, and protests were accused of being unpatriotic. After such cataclysmic devastation, artists in this interwar period believed they had been summoned to help reconstruct humanity's life and world, and to create a better world. Some artists expressed their anger by criticizing the prevailing conditions. Others expressed utopian ideals through their work. The impulse to use art as a means for social progress is notable for this time. This is also the moment when modernist styles and innovations begin to spread to non-European cultures, creating new variations in many places. Even though they weren't an official group, Dada began in Zurich as a reaction to the horror and carnage of World War I. They blamed society's supposedly rational forces of scientific and technological development for bringing Western society to the verge of ruin. One version of their name's origin has it that in 1916 someone stuck a penknife in a dictionary at random, and it landed on the nonsensical sounding term Dada, which means hobby horse in French or yes yes in Slavic tongues. Attempting to overturn European traditional values which had produced only chaos and destruction, the Dadaists responded with art that was the opposite of rational and was simultaneously absurd, playful, confrontational, nihilistic, intuitive, and emotive. They wanted to shock by exposing the absurdity of the West's social and political values and ideas. Despite these protests, Dadaist art is often playful and spontaneous. One of the most radical of all 20th century artists is the Dadaist Marcel Duchamp. This famous work, called Fountain from 1917, was a factory-produced urinal that Duchamp signed with someone else's name. Originally created to provoke his colleagues and expose the hypocrisy of their supposed liberal attitudes, Duchamp had the boldness and daring to submit something that was mass-produced to a non-juried art show. A non-juried art show means that all art submitted is accepted for the show. Nonetheless, Duchamp's provocative work was rejected. He called these works ready-mades. Defending against the accusation that this work was considered immoral, Duchamp anonymously wrote, quote, "Mr. Mutt's fountain is not immoral. That is absurd. No more than a bathtub is immoral. It is a fixture that you see every day in plumbers' shop windows. Whether Mr. Mutt with his own hands made the fountain has no importance. He chose it. He took an ordinary article of life, placed it so that its useful significance disappeared under the new title and point of view, created a new thought for that object." End quote. This challenging work is not that dissimilar from musical artists today that popularly use samples from other artists. For example, listen to the popular Ray Charles song I Got a Woman from the 1950s and compare it to the contemporary song Gold Digger by Kanye West. Kanye West is using the melody and groove from Ray Charles' tune, but has changed the context by making it about a woman that has tricked him. With the creation of Duchamp's ready-mades, there is a real argument to be made that Duchamp is one of the first true samplers, at least of visual culture. Striking at the heart of traditional standards of beauty, Duchamp took a postcard reproduction of Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa and added a mustache and beard on her face. The title LHOOQ, pronounced in French, is a pun on the phrase which translates to, quote, "She's hot in the tail," end quote. Duchamp's cheeky irreverence towards a sacrosanct image from art history was meant to jar people out of their mindless acceptance of traditional values. With his focus on the artist's idea over aesthetics and skill, Marcel Duchamp is considered to be the godfather or precursor of conceptual art from the 1960s. In keeping with their playful and irreverent attitudes toward traditional values, one of the Dada's favorite mantras was to, quote, make something useful, useless, end quote. This work by the American artist Man Ray was inspired by seeing a flat iron in a hardware shop. Man Ray had said that this was an object that was almost invisible, that no one really looked at it. He then glued a row of tacks down the center, creating a useless but provocative visible object that viewers could then interpret to suit themselves. He thought mystery was wonderful for art. Man Ray's philosophy was to design works that would amuse, bewilder, annoy, or inspire reflection. Regarding negative responses he received about his work, he once stated, quote, I am indifferent to things that do not interest me, but never would I attack them, especially in the creative arts, because anybody who does creative art is a sacred person. I don't care what he does. Whether he paints academic pictures or is modern or different from anything else, he cannot do any harm. Whereas a bad politician, a bad doctor, or a bad cook can kill you. Dadaist incorporated the influence of Cubism into photomontages or photo collages, which were parts of photographs that were combined in intriguing ways. In Cut with the Kitchen Knife, Dada Through the Last Weimar Beer Belly, Cultural Epic of Germany by Hannah Höch, the lone female Berlin Dadaist used photomontage to express her crushing indictment of capitalism and militarism in the period between the wars, when the dissident Nazi movement emerged. This work captures the fragmentation of revolutions and uprisings in 1918 and 19, taking place at the end of World War I in Germany. Höch juxtaposed the heads of German military leaders with exotic dancers' bodies, and placed photographs of some of her fellow Dadaists among images of Marx, Lenin, and other revolutionary figures in the lower right section. Here, the Kaiser Wilhelm II, the last German emperor and king of Prussia, is being made fun of, as he has two wrestlers that make up his mustache. Here we can see the head of General von Hindenburg on the body of an exotic dancer. Many of the Dadaists expressed scornful and nihilistic attitudes, as they believed it was pointless to bring beauty into a world that could destroy itself. To its proponents, Dada was not art, it was anti-art. For everything that art stood for, Dada was to represent the opposite. Where art was concerned with traditional aesthetics, Dada ignored aesthetics. If art was to appeal to sensibilities, Dada was intended to offend. Rejecting tradition, the Dadaists hoped to destroy traditional attitudes about culture and aesthetics. In the 1920s, many artists stirred by Dadaist principles objected to the priority given to science, rationality, and progress by European culture that was also dismissive of the powerful unconscious mind. We call this group the Surrealists. Inspired by dreams and the writings of Sigmund Freud, the Surrealists regarded the unconscious mind as all-powerful and thought it a higher reality than the conscious mind. The Surrealists, according to the art historian Robert Hughes, were the great truth seekers. They recognized that there is an invisible reality that we all know exists, and that it was their duty to make this invisible reality visible. Encouraged by Dadaist ideas, the element of chance became the basis of a primary Surrealist creative principle. There is a strong connection between the Dadaists and the Surrealists because many of the Dadaists later became part of the Surrealist group. Employing new anti-rational aesthetic strategies such as chance, Hans Arp created untitled collage with squares arranged according to the law of chance by tearing paper into pieces, then dropping them to the floor and then pasting each scrap where it happened to land. Rather than controlling the design and composition, he gave control to the random hand of gravity. As a devastated combat survivor of the war, German artist Max Ernst explored what lurked in his unconscious by creating the technique of frottage, which is French for rubbing. In this technique, he laid his canvas over textured surfaces and then rubbed his canvas with pencils and crayons. Out of this experimental process, Ernst would be astonished at the shapes and patterns that would appear to inspire and stimulate his work. In this work, Horde, Ernst has captured what appears to be a chaotic scene of rampaging monsters with wild and flailing limbs. Perhaps this unconscious expression is an echo from the trauma of his war years. Teasing the viewer with this mysterious work, The Lovers, the Belgian surrealist René Magritte drapes a cloth to conceal his figures' identities, which corresponds to a larger surrealist interest in masks, disguises, and what lies beyond or beneath visible surfaces. Another example and interpretation of this idea is Magritte's later painting, The Rape. When Magritte was 13, his mother committed suicide by drowning herself in a river. As the story goes, Magritte was present when his mother's body was pulled out of the river. Her nightgown was apparently wrapped around her face, exposing only her naked body. The French poet and leader of the Surrealists, André Breton, claimed, quote, "Beauty must be convulsive or it will not be at all," end quote. The Dutch artist, Piet Mondrian, observed that, quote, "Magritte's pictures are always violent in some way. Though never showing an act of violence, he does violence to our accepted ideas and conventions. Magritte messes with the system of things, rendering commonplace things strange. His art points to an underlying disturbance rather than an underlying order," end quote. By making the familiar disturbing and strange, Magritte raises questions about the nature of representation and reality. With his revolution of the subconscious, Catalan artist Joan Miró created playful, childlike, and imaginative abstract surrealist works. Invoking the Dadaist element of chance, Miró used the spontaneous process of automatism, which means action without conscious control. By randomly scribbling and doodling without any preconceived notion, automatism creates the chance moment that an accident might reveal or unmask something from the subconscious of the artist. In his work, Miró employs abstract organic forms as flat patterns with a distinctive style that combines brightly colored shapes, resembling paper cutouts with letters, stick figures, and obscure signs. Miró expressed contempt for conventional painting methods because he thought they supported bourgeois society. He declared an assassination of painting. Creating one of the most quintessential surrealist works is Merritt Oppenheim's Object. The inspiration for this work began with a joke over lunch in a Parisian cafe with Pablo Picasso and Dora Maar. After Picasso had casually commented that anything could be covered with fur, Oppenheim later went to a store and bought a white teacup, saucer, and spoon and wrapped them in the fur of a Chinese gazelle and titled the work Object. She transformed something that was traditionally associated with decorum and feminine refinement into a confounding surrealist sculpture. This work exemplifies the idea promoted by the surrealist leader, André Breton, that mundane things presented in unexpected ways had the power to challenge reason and connect us to the subconscious. Perhaps the most famous of the surrealists is the Spanish artist Salvador Dali. In this work, The Persistence of Memory, Dali is inviting us into his nightmare. Here, everything that we know to be true is collapsing. In this dreamlike image, clocks in a deserted landscape melt, suggesting perhaps that time has no meaning. Ants, which are symbols of decay, swarm over a watch. And the fleshy creature with insect-like eyelashes and perhaps a tongue coming from its nose is a self-portrait, according to Dali. In many works, Dali presents the viewer with two equally convincing readings of the same image. He called this technique the paranoid critical method, referring to a paranoid person's belief that ordinary images are used to transmit sinister, hidden messages. This method cultivated self-induced psychotic hallucinations in order to create art. The Slave Market, with the disappearing bust of Voltaire, is an excellent example of Dali's skill at creating paranoid critical hallucinations. Here, two Dutch women in the slave market recreate the sculptural bust of the French Enlightenment philosopher Voltaire, who was known for his opposition to slavery. The fruit dishes also create dual illusions. The apple in the center bowl appears to be the rear of the background figure, and the pear in the dish on the right dissolves into the hill in the distance. Another work using this paranoid critical method is Metamorphosis of Narcissus. The classic version of this Greek myth is told by the 1st century Roman poet Ovid. Narcissus was a hunter that was known for his beauty, but he rejected all romantic advances. One of his admirers, a nymph named Echo, fell so madly in love with him that after he rejected her, she wasted away until only her voice remained. The goddess Nemesis, taking pity of Echo, convinced Narcissus to gaze into a pool. Seeing his own face reflected in the water, Narcissus fell in love with his own reflection. Because he was unable to embrace his own reflection, Narcissus too wasted away, and in his place grew into the flower that bears his name, the narcissus. This also gives us the origins of the term narcissism, referring to having an excessive interest in oneself and one's physical appearance. About this painting, Dali stated, quote, "If one looks for some time, from a slight distance and with a certain distant fixedness, at the hypnotically immobile figure of Narcissus, it gradually disappears until at last it is completely invisible." End quote. His hallucinatory style of illusionistic, dreamlike painting has been called representational surrealism. Let's discuss the influence of Cubism. Of all modern art movements, Cubism appears to have been the most influential. A cursory examination of many influential artists from this period show that in their progression as artists, they all experimented with the new style. The Cubist style was a puzzle between representation and abstraction, figure and ground, and suggests a world of fluctuation, constant change, and evolution, all characteristics of the new modern era. In Russia, artists took Cubism in the direction of complete abstraction. The radical artist Kazimir Malevich simplified the Cubist language into flat, irregular rectangles against a plain background. He called his style suprematism, which is meant to convey his belief that the supreme reality in the world is pure feeling, which attaches to no object and calls for new, non-objective forms in art, shapes not related to objects in the visible world. Malevich focused on the supremacy of shape and color as he believed it always had the ability to communicate, regardless of subject matter. His paintings were intended to convey such contemporary phenomena as the sensation of flight and the feeling of fading away, magnetic attraction, by symbolizing those technological advancements in geometric forms. Bringing to life things that had never existed before, Malevich thought he was similar to God. He said, quote, "What I create is not subject or subordinate to any of the laws of nature," end quote. For example, you can turn this painting in any direction and it makes no difference to your understanding of the work. The painting doesn't adhere to any physical law as it has no up or down. Gravity is not a factor here. Malevich thought it was the same as the laws of physics in outer space or that of the universe. In France, artist Ferdinand Léger, who had fought on the front line in World War I, introduced the contemporary preoccupation with machine-age imagery into the language of Cubism. In this work, Soldiers Playing Cards, Léger is combining the subject matter of war with the aesthetic of the machine and his unique style of Cubism. Playing cards in an abstract machine-like environment, the soldiers are identifiable only by their helmets and their tubular arms. They seem to resemble robots or machines more than men. The use of gradations of silver and gray suggest we are inside a machine. The sense of movement and activity in the composition expresses the fast pace of life as a soldier. Industrial, tubular, and machine-like objects came to the forefront of his artwork. The bold, simple forms he used were reminiscent of the industrial world and often did not depict a clear subject matter as many Cubist paintings did. Like the Surrealists who wanted to free human consciousness, a desire for social betterment and progress inspired several art movements of this period. Many of the groundbreaking abstractionists felt that the ideal order of non-objective art was linked to a coming utopian social order, and that artists had been summoned to help reconstruct humanity's life and world. Influenced by the sculpture and assemblages of Pablo Picasso, the Russian art movement Constructivism was founded in 1915 by Vladimir Tatlin and Alexander Rodchenko. The Constructivists created art that was meant to reflect modern industrial society and urban space. The movement emphasized abstract art, modern materials, and utility. These artists rejected traditional views about sculpture such as modeling and carving. Their works were constructed piece by piece in space. They emphasized real space rather than the traditional sculptural concern for mass, which made them revolutionary. They created some of the first total abstractions in the history of sculpture and formulated the constructivist principle, truth to materials, which asserted that certain intrinsic properties make cylinders the most appropriate shape for metal, flat planes the best for wood, and so on. This work is a model for the Monument to the Third International by Vladimir Tatlin in 1919. This structure was intended to be 1,300 feet high, which would have dwarfed the Eiffel Tower. It was to be built primarily of steel and glass with its structure on the outside. It was to house 3 office buildings that would rotate at varying speeds, once an hour, a day, and a month. This work was to symbolize the dynamism and progress of humanity's ascent to a new stage of evolution, which Tatlin thought was the communist state then being established in Russia. However, the Russian government in the mid-1920s only tolerated art that could be understood by the public. Even though the model was widely shown in Europe, the project was too revolutionary to be realized. Some of the modern artists later decided to leave Russia to develop and promote their ideas elsewhere. It's important to remember that Russian artists were driven by a profoundly utopian conception of modernism. They had fresh minds remote from the melting pot of modernism, and they had the desire to beat the West at its own game. Russia's early 20th century ancient peasant culture and mystical, even messianic Orthodox religion made it especially fertile ground for the growth of the idealizing tendencies of the new Western art. Here, the Russian artist Lyubov Popova creates flat, planar shapes suggesting a shallow space of only forms and color. She was influenced by Cubism, Futurism, Suprematism, and later became a Constructivist. Joining the Constructivists, she declared easel painting was to be abandoned and all creative work was to be for the people in the making of the new society. Led by Piet Mondrian, a group of artists in the Netherlands promoted utopian ideals and developed a simplified, non-representational geometric style called de Stijl, meaning the style. In pursuit of a world of universal harmony, they rejected both the visual world of the senses and the subjectivity of the individual artist, and used only the straight line, the colors red, blue, yellow, and white, and black, and gray. They were influenced by the pragmatically designed works of American architect Frank Lloyd Wright and the idea of a universal consciousness. A reaction to the chaos of the war years, Mondrian consciously paints his desire for order, balance, and harmony. He wanted to develop abstraction toward its ultimate goal, the expression of pure reality. Eventually fleeing the onslaught of fascism in Europe in 1940, Mondrian moved to New York City, where his orderly paintings became more bright and lively. The pulsing and rhythmic energy in Broadway boogie-woogie reflects his fascination with the geometric, technological world with its neon lights, and especially the staccato rhythms of American jazz. In architecture, the ideas from the Constructivists, de Stijl, and the American architect Frank Lloyd Wright led to a new style of architecture that emerged in Germany, France, and the Netherlands in the 1920s and 30s. This new style, or school, came to be known as the International style. Using new structural materials such as steel, plate glass, and reinforced concrete, International-style architects created structures that were characterized by clean, unornamented geometric forms and open, efficient spaces. Non-load-bearing walls allowed for extensive use of glass and created well-lit and flexible spaces for interiors. Where Frank Lloyd Wright wanted his structures to blend into their environments, the International style visually contrasts with nature. For the Schroeder House in Utrecht in the Netherlands, Gerrit Rietveld incorporates the rules of De Stijl. Its design of interacting planes, spaces, and primary colors closely related to the paintings of Piet Mondrian. Even though the structure was built in 1925, stylistically, it appears as if it could be built today. In France, Charles-Édouard Jeanneret, known as Le Corbusier, created his famous international-style house, the Villa Savoie. His basic structural frame allows for complete freedom in the arrangement of interior and exterior walls and extensive use of panels of plate glass. Le Corbusier called his houses machines for living. The German-American architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe was one of the most influential architects to come out of this school. Mies designed his German pavilion in 1929 out of marble, glass, and steel. He created an open, flowing space so that the visitor never feels boxed in. In this drawing for an architectural competition to create Berlin's first skyscraper in 1921, Mies proposed a fully glass-covered skyscraper for the site. It was based on the untried idea that a supporting steel skeleton could free the structure's exterior walls from their load-bearing function, allowing a building to have a surface more translucent than solid. In this technically and aesthetically adventurous design, the architect, whose motto was "less is more," proposed a transparent building that revealed its cantilevered floor planes and thin supports. Mies van der Rohe referred to this concept as an architecture of skin and bones. He didn't win the competition, but when Mies immigrated to the United States in 1938, his ideas greatly influenced the post-World War II development of the skyscraper. This concludes part 1 of our lecture, Between World Wars. Thank you!